Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.
Time and a new era here in the sports intel world, and we're ringing it in with probably the perfect guy for this. We've got Big G in studio.
What's up?
Welcome back, Big G. We're happy to have him. He's got good energy. He's got a bag of things that are going to keep him energized for the show. I'm not sure what you've got over there.
Oh, I just got like energy drinks and like some snacks, so I'm probably not going to sleep until Wednesday.
He's gonna be energized. Well, that's all right. You'll be up for the show. That's what we need from you. But my question is, do you have a sandwich in there, because it's National Sandwich Day?
I do not have a sandwich in there. I love sandwiches. Sandwiches are God's perfect food.
That's wow. Okay, I didn't know that would be your take. Now, I'm worried that we may set a record for you firing me here early in the show. But we famously, it's actually one of my favorite segments ever on the show. We famously got into an argument about peanut butter and a hamburger. But I have to admit to you, Big G, I like a grilled peanut butter and jelly still as a 42-year-old adult.
Okay, you get a raise.
Oh, okay. Wow. I'm surprised that worked. I don't know that that's my favorite sandwich, but when I'm at home, that's oftentimes something I'll make if I'm in the mood for that. I like an egg sandwich, and I like a lot of the deli sandwiches and such. And sandwiches, it's a pretty wide category for me. Do you have, since it's God's perfect food, do you have a favorite sandwich?
Grilled ham and American cheese.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yes.
I feel like that's a classic one there. Yeah, see, you can't really go wrong. I feel like, I mean, you can, but I don't have like a wrong one for you. I wouldn't like put peanut butter on that or anything.
God, I hope not.
And I wouldn't really put it on a hamburger, to be honest. But I had tried that. But I like just a classic grilled peanut butter and jelly. I like all my sandwiches grilled. That's my preference. I like a hot sandwich over a cold one.
Right, and I can go either way. Grilled anything is always good. Grilled ham and cheese, grilled peanut butter and jelly, grilled cheese for that matter.
That's a classic.
Yeah.
I noticed they have I think it's maybe Applebee's that has a grilled cheeseburger. How do we feel about the combination of those two things?
I don't mind that one.
I actually have a write-in question for you. Actually, this is a real question. Does Big G consider a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, that is a good question, and I will say no.
And what's the reasoning behind the no? What do you require for Big G to officially deem something a sandwich?
Because a sandwich involves 2 slices of bread, and a hot dog is one piece of bread cut down the middle. That does not qualify for that. Now, if the one piece of bread accidentally breaks, then it's a sandwich.
Oh, okay. I like that. Okay, so you just have to break that up, because they do sometimes do that and then kind of grill it,
right,
for some of the hot dog iterations here. Yeah. This was a write-in from Chicago, so they know how to do hot dogs over there, and that's a popular discussion here. So I like that as a discussion point.
God, my infamy is spreading.
Exactly. See, Big G spreading the nation in the new version of Sports Intel here. So, part of the reason we left this segment open, obviously, fans of the show and listeners of the show are probably used to jumping into an interview right away, but this is the first week that we'll be doing the Shane Graham's Extra Points with Ryan Walsh. That'll be on Thursday, so we'll be doing the football coverage over there, but we got to get Big G's take on the football game. I know it's not necessarily going to be the favorite. He's already given me a look. It's not the favorite thing to talk about, but we can't just ignore the game. I feel like we previewed a little bit with Ron the week before because we couldn't get the Vikings folks on, though they should be on Thursday. I'm sure they'll be happy about the game. But one of the things we talked about is there was a lot of returns for the Vikings. There's a lot of guys back, and I do think that factored into this game. Not only J.J. McCarthy, but from the start of the season, they were missing Addison for the suspension. They were missing Van Ginkel for most of the year. They were missing basically over half of their offensive line. Darisaw for a good portion of the year, and they really reinforced that offensive and defensive line. They kind of used the strategy of, hey, let's let Darnold go. We don't have to pay JJ yet because he's on his rookie deal, and let's invest that money in the trenches, which the Lions kind of could be a big fan of that strategy. They've put a lot of effort and money into their trenches, and we hadn't really seen the results of it yet because we hadn't really seen the full pairing of offensive and defensive line. But I'm curious what your takeaways were from the game. I know you're probably disappointed, just like Dan Campbell was, but I'm curious what you saw from the game.
They stunk. It's as simple as that. They stunk. There was no effort. They looked flat. They looked unprepared. They looked like they all went to Tahiti over the bye week and didn't really study anything, didn't really do anything. And, there were a couple of exceptions. There were some people that played hard, but they were unprepared. Minnesota came in ready, hot and ready to go. J.J. McCarthy was excellent. Andrew Van Ginkel is a game changer. Being back, he's absolutely a game changer. There was just so much, and Dan Campbell said it best. He said we did everything we had to do to lose that game. He said we looked unprepared. He said we looked not ready to play, and he says that falls on me, and absolutely it does. I didn't get a chance to hear his press conference today once he had 24 or 12, 14 hours to kind of digest it, but I can't imagine it was any different. They and losing Mahogany for probably the season's not going to be good for them. And they've got some offensive linemen in the practice squad, and Iwasoka, number 74, he has started before, so that's not that big of a drop off. But
Well, I do try to take the positives as much as I can. I think there are probably two positives out of that. Ostensibly, you said one, which is they basically did as many things wrong as we've seen them do in a while. I think the most similar game I can think of is that Packers game from 2 years ago, where the Packers were coming in and they had lost a bunch of games,
right?
And the wheels just kind of fell off for the Lions. This was pretty similar, and they still only lost by 3 to what should be a pretty competitive team. That's one. The other that I'm curious to get your take on, because the Thursday show will be after this, so we got to do a little bit of a preview of the deadline here, because I'm wondering if you see this affecting, because this was arguably their worst game of the season here, and I'm curious if this will affect their trade deadline approach. Notoriously, Holmes isn't super aggressive. The Eagles are being very aggressive, and that's one of the bigger competitors for the Lions here on the NFC side. That's their trademark. That's Howie Roseman. That's how he runs that team. He's very aggressive. He's picked up 2 corners. He got Jalen Phillips, who was one of the guys that was rumored that the Lions would have some interest in him as a D end. But now you've got a couple other positions in there. You've got you mentioned a couple of them, but D end has been in the mix for a while, so that's a possibility. Right. Then you've got the offensive line now. I think you kind of consider that. You're right to point out that they've got more depth on the practice squad than they do in the other position that they could be trading for, which is cornerback or defensive back in general, because Arnold has gotten beat up again. Reed's still out. Do you reinforce that group at all, even though they have been pretty good? I mean, they were still pretty decent. Arnold looked good when he was on the field. Yassine looked decent again. A lot of those, the Legion of Whom, that's one of my favorite nicknames. I wish I could take credit for that. I didn't create that one, but Legion of Whom is great. But do you reinforce that? Do you see them doing any of that? Because you got Decker that's beat up too. I know he wasn't out of the game, but man, he doesn't look like he's long for this season here.
Yeah, I think if they go any position, they would probably lean towards another offensive lineman. Everybody's talking about Trey Hendrickson, but Cincinnati wants a first for Trey Hendrickson. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I don't think Brad Holmes should give up a first for Trey Hendrickson. Great pass rusher, but he can't play the run. I think right now offensive lineman is the biggest need. I think maybe another defensive back. Whether they sign one that was either not playing or they trade for somebody, as long as the cost isn't too high. But
I think Reek Wolin would be one of the top names on my list because I feel like he's a bit undervalued. He's the corner at Seattle there. He had a great first 2 years, really. Then he had some injury issues. His play has gone down, but he's built perfectly for press coverage. He's kind of working his way out of Seattle because they took Devin Witherspoon in the draft, and they've kind of gone a different direction with that position. He's a guy that it looks like they might not be very aggressive to re-sign, so they might want to get something out of him, but I think that's a day 3 pick kind of thing, like a 5th round-ish pick is what the value is by a lot of the experts. That would be, because that's a guy with size and press coverage ability, throwing him into the mix as, and this was, I think, Mike Payton that said this maybe last week or 2 weeks ago. He was talking about him maybe filling the Ifeatu Melifonwu role for the Lions, which Melifonwu came in down the stretch and really played great football down the stretch last year. That kind of got lost in the injury issues last year, but they basically played 3 safeties at the end of the year and made that work because Branch, Joseph, and Melifonwu all deserve to play and deserve to be on the field together. So I'm wondering if I go after somebody like that. The other name that was thrown out there that was interesting because Tennessee is a team that's not doing very well is Kevin Zeitler.
Oh, I'd bring him back in a heartbeat.
And he had a very good year. The only overlap that I can see there is he almost exclusively plays right guard. I don't know if given he's a veteran, I got to think he could maybe switch to left, but he pretty much only plays right. I don't know if you want to move Ratledge over to the left. That's kind of like a technical thing. Like, okay, can we just have them? Zeitler's a all Pro Bowl experienced veteran here. I'm sure he can probably figure that out, especially between the offensive lineman that he has.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Ratledge plays left anyway.
Then he was on the right, but
I could be wrong.
But it'll be interesting to see where they want to move those pieces around because they've got Glasgow in the middle too, which he's been decent, but he's almost better as like a 6th lineman. That's where I would have loved to have seen him start the season. They just didn't have that because Ragnow obviously retired at the beginning of the season. But it'll be interesting to see. I think Tennessee's a good target because they also have defensive pieces that I could see them being interested in. Arden Key has been brought up a couple times. He would be a day 3 pick. That could be your low cost defensive guy. But it'll be interesting. I agree with you on Van Ginkel though. I just want to say that he's like Barnes and Anzalone combined almost for them. Right. He has the pass rush ability, but he's also very good all around the field like Anzalone is. So he's an underrated piece in that Brian Flores defense.
Yeah, well, we'll find out tomorrow at 5. That's when the deadline is.
That's when the deadline is. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and then we'll have Jeremy Reisman of Pride of Detroit on Thursday to talk about that along with Shane Graham, and then we'll have the folks from the Purple Persuasion here on Thursday. But this was fun. I like getting the producers involved in the show. I'm glad we got Big G's take on sandwiches. I have one more follow-up sandwich question, but we'll probably keep that for the end of the show here.
Oh, okay.
So, but it's whether an open-faced sandwich is a sandwich, because what if it only comes with one piece of bread and it doesn't have anything to connect to? That's a stumper right there, Big G.
It is not a stumper. We will talk about that at the end of the show.
What a tease. We're going to talk about the open-faced sandwich, so stay tuned for that. But maybe not more importantly, but also important, stay tuned for Robert Bondy. We're going to do a little bit of a hybrid with him. We're going to talk some MSU basketball and football, and on the MSU football side, we'll talk about obviously the coaching situation and the situation in the Big Ten, because as listeners of the show know, I'm an Indiana grad, and I don't know what to do with the most recent rankings, so maybe he'll help me adjust to that. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're going to do a little bit of a hybrid, since this is starting to move the football coverage over to the Shane Graham show. Still have to get some football coverage in on this show, and this is the perfect guy to do it. He can talk about a lot of different things. He's one of our favorites. He's been on the show often, and I don't know how much he'll want to talk about his own team, but I'm hoping maybe he'll want to talk about my team some, because he always does a good job with the Big Ten as a whole. But this is Robert Bondy of Spartans Wire. He covers football, basketball, a bunch of things for them, and I didn't really think, Robert, well, first of all, our subject of the day is it's National Sandwich Day, so I want Robert Bondy to make the perfect sandwich here.
The perfect sandwich, wow. Well, I'm always a sucker kind of for a Philly cheesesteak, so anything with that, but maybe with like a Chipotle mayo or something on there as well, normally makes me happy. So, but I'm also not picky. I could eat a lot of different kinds of sandwiches.
That got a head nod from Big G. That got the seal of approval there. So I think we're good on that one. I actually had one of those for lunch in honor of National Sandwich Day. So I'm a big fan of those as well. But Robert, I did think we'd be talking to you at this time, but I didn't think we'd be talking about, hey, what do we do with Jonathan Smith at this point in the season? I thought we'd be talking about MSU jockeying for position, making a roll to a bowl game, and unfortunately, that's not the conversation we're having. It's still an interesting conversation, but and I do think Smith is a good coach, but it just kind of seems like he's lost the team a little bit. I don't always like that as a phrase, but there are some situations where it seems like a good coach or a coach that does have some ability just maybe it doesn't mesh well with a team and has a hard time turning them around. Is that kind of what you see, or is there something deeper here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably something along those lines. I mean, it's probably also not necessarily the most talented roster, and they've had some bad luck again on the injury front. But I mean, there's the phrase that's kind of going around right now that I've seen is they're allergic to winning, and you kind of see it. And I know that's kind of a odd phrase to say, but you know, there's not really one thing that you can put your finger on why they can't figure out the way to win some of these games. I mean, you know, some of those losses certainly, you know, the better team won when you look at, you know, games against USC and Indiana and probably Michigan as well. But then you look at last week against Minnesota, a team that they probably should have won that game. I mean, the win expectancy percentages probably would favor them in a lot of categories, and they couldn't find a way to win it, whether it was, you know, poor officiating in some regards, but also, you know, you gave a 80-yard drive in the last few minutes to let them tie it up, send overtime. It's just one thing after another. And I will say, I think Jonathan Smith has done a good job of keeping the team together in some regards. I mean, the fact that they, you know, came out last week and played well enough to win after that, you know, kind of putting it all out there too the week before against the rival Michigan, a game they kind of unload all they have left. And the fact that they got them to play again, you know, well enough to win last week, I give them credit to that. But there's obviously something not working, and it's kind of getting to the boiling point, whether it's with the fans, the media is noticing it. You know, I'm sure the donors and the higher-ups are also kind of fed up. It's a tough spot to be, right? So I think he's not a bad coach. I just don't know if he's necessarily the right coach for what Michigan State needs right now and quite frankly, what they need moving forward.
With Jay Batt coming in, it was kind of, I guess, more in question than we talked about maybe in the first interview, because obviously he's going to want to install his guy. I don't necessarily know who that is. That's going to be kind of my next path to go down with you, because I'm not sure if I know there's been some articles thrown out there. Spartans Wire has had some things, but if he does get removed, I'm curious what you think here for a replacement, because I'm sure Bat, obviously he's got some experience with folks. I don't know if he's going to tap into that, or it's always interesting, the approach, because the fans, they always go to, okay, can we get James Franklin? Can we get, I feel like, I don't know if Urban Meyer was thrown out there for the Michigan State job, but he always gets thrown into the mix. Now Saban's coming back into the mix with these things, and we go for this fantasy booking kind of scenario. I'm not sure. Obviously, those are very lofty goals, but I'm not sure who you have your eye on and who you think is most likely here in the potential hiring process.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of options out there. I mean, obviously the names you just mentioned are going to be the people that I think a lot of fans will, clamor for and want. I personally, if they could find a way to get James Franklin to come, I think would be a great hire. I don't know necessarily if he wants to stay in the Big Ten after what happened at Penn State. But I think ultimately you're going to have to look at probably a up-and-coming Group of Five head coach, someone like an Alex Golish at USF. I know has some Midwest ties. That's someone that I personally have kind of circled and kept my eye on. I know there's some other SEC schools, because he does coach down in Florida currently, that will also probably make a pursuit for him. So that's probably my top guy at the list. But I mean, there's a lot of good coaches out there, and I think what ultimately Michigan State needs to do is they need to go out and get a guy who's had consecutive but also consistent winning, regardless of at the level, right? I think Michigan State for now is, the last two coach hires they've made have, between Mel Tucker and then Jonathan Smith, don't necessarily have a long history of winning, right? They've had some good seasons, certainly, but they need to find a guy who maybe has done it, more than once, and maybe has been able to put it together at a consistent path that, can be repeated at Michigan State. And another thing too, I think it's kind of I don't know if it's a running bit or what you want to call it, but they need someone who shows a little bit more emotion on the sideline, I would say, than what you're seeing with Jonathan Smith. I know that really bothers a lot of fans. It hadn't really bothered me until this year, but when you see some of the weeks that have gone by recently, you almost wonder how the players get motivated to play for them, because you don't really see the emotion on the sidelines. And again, we don't see everything behind closed doors, but I do think whoever they do bring in is going to have that kind of excitement level, or have that kind of ability to generate some more buzz amongst the players, the fans, the donors, everyone around the program, because right now it's kind of a stale product.
That's a good point, because I do think that factors in. I think the guys that, if you want to call it losing the team or what have you, I feel like the guys that tend to do that are the guys that lack energy a little bit, because another guy that I'm thinking of is he's a pro coach, but Matt Eberflus, that seemed to happen with the Bears last year, and he kind of seemed to be the anti-Dan Campbell to me, which was then made it ironic that they hired Ben Johnson, but it made a lot of sense, because I thought they wanted somebody like that, whereas Smith, I do think can be a pretty good technical coach. He seems to be a good recruiter, but once you do kind of lose the guys, you need somebody to help pick up that slack a little bit. One name, I was kind of browsing names while we're talking here and looking at some of the Spartans Wire coverage. One name that I was surprised by that you talked about, you referenced the article, was Pat Fitzgerald. I'm curious how that one came around, because I didn't think of him, but there are different categories for this. You've got maybe legendary coaches that retired or called it quits or got fired, and we talked about kind of that tier. Then you've got, like you said, the up-and-comers that maybe didn't get the big job yet, and you're trying to identify the next guy. And then the other category is a guy that maybe had a similar job or a higher job, but then got fired or didn't necessarily work out at that school. I guess Franklin's technically in that category, and then Fitzgerald would be too, coming from Northwestern here.
Yeah, no, I think Pat Fitzgerald's another interesting name that's going to come up. Obviously the reasoning for why he was dismissed at Northwestern wasn't, a standard situation, and I know he was essentially, vindicated, or he won his lawsuit with the university. So with that kind of in the rearview mirror now, and I don't think the details ever came out of how much he ended up winning in that lawsuit. It could be a matter of if he wants to get back into coaching, I think it certainly is a guy you got to call. If not, maybe he's fine being retired and enjoying the money he got out of that and all the years he spent coaching. But if he's interested in getting back into coaching, it's definitely a guy that you got to consider. Because if you've won the Big Ten, I think he took Northwestern to the Big Ten championship game at least once, maybe twice. And that's just, you don't see that Northwestern, right? So he knows how to win the Big Ten. The only, I think, potential drawback to a guy like Pat Fitzgerald would be, winning at Northwestern is a little bit different than winning at Michigan State, right? I mean, Northwestern, obviously, there's a lot of academic hurdles, and Fitzgerald played at Northwestern, so, you kind of get back into that dilemma potentially of, do they have the same passion when they come to Michigan State? I mean, we're seeing that kind of with Jonathan Smith right now, right, where that's another thing people question is, he left his alma mater to come to Michigan State. Would it be the same with Fitzgerald coming from Northwestern to Michigan State? So, again, he's won very well in the Big Ten. You'd be silly not to call him and at least engage with him and see where his level's at. Because again, if you can win the Big Ten at Northwestern, you could probably win at most schools. So definitely a name to consider. Again, there's so many ways they can go. I think the biggest thing though at this point is they probably just need to find a way to move on from Jonathan Smith and figure out a way to make it work where they're not going to financially hinder themselves too much, but then also kind of keep the fan base happy. Because I don't, unfortunately, I bought into Jonathan Smith. I thought it was going to work out. We had the conversation before the year that I could, see them potentially winning 8-9 games, maybe even 10, but it hasn't gone that way. And I think at this point in time, I don't know how you bring them back for another year, and I don't know how you don't move on at this point.
I really could have seen it going the same direction too. I was kind of on that path with you. And what's crazy to think of is the fact that we were talking about them potentially, you had an article at the time talking about them being this year's Indiana. And in a weird way, Indiana was this year's Indiana. They just took it to another level. But with the coach, that's what I've been marveling at in this whole process, because admittedly, as an Indiana fan, I think I'm supposed to I'm excited, but I don't know how to take it. I can't brag as an Indiana fan. That doesn't work. We've been bad for a lot of years. That doesn't really work. But I marvel at the fact when we're talking about the head coaching search that Cignetti was available for Indiana to grab at this age and this point in his career. I know that's easier to say now, but even with his resume before he was picked up, the fact that he was under Saban at Alabama and then he had such success at James Madison and everywhere he went, and he's very high up in the overall winning percentage here overall. It's wild to me that Indiana was able to scoop him up, and then I had a lot of people that were worried about, now he's going to leave because he was going to ascend. But that's not really as much of a threat for a guy like that, where this is his first Power 5 job and he's a little bit older, so he's not necessarily looking to ascend. And why would you leave IU? You've turned them into a top 5 program, and now they're cheering you on and behind you in a way that if you went to another school, that would be pretty tough. That's why Franklin got ousted from Penn State, because he was doing well, but not well enough. That's going to be harder to do for Cignetti to get booted, because it would have to take years of sustained success and then have the IU fans treat the football program like they treat the basketball program. But it's just amazing to me that type of guy was available. So now that when we look at these other Big Ten jobs, Michigan State historically is a better job than IU. So you would hope they could pick up somebody of that level. But the fact that somebody like that was out there was interesting. And I'm curious if they can hopefully find, for the Spartans fan base, find somebody like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, it's almost, again, the success that Cignetti has had at Indiana, I don't think anyone could have predicted. No one. And if they told you they predicted this, they're crazy, because I don't think anyone in their right mind would have predicted what they did last year and then this year. I mean, not only are they winning games, but they're looking like they're on the same level as an Ohio State or an Alabama, right? I mean, if you put them on the same field, you actually this year could believe they could beat them. So it's kind of nuts to think what he's done there in such a short amount of time. So no one could have predicted it. I don't know. I can't sit here and tell you whoever Michigan State gets is going to do that, but they need to find someone that can at least get half of that or 3/4 of what Cignetti's done, because quite frankly, when you compare what Jonathan Smith's been doing compared to what Signetti's been doing, it's not even a comparison. They started at the same time, and I don't even think Michigan State fans are necessarily expecting, Jonathan Smith to be at the same level as the Signetti. It's just not even, we're not even having the same conversation right now, right? So going back to, what you were saying, could Michigan State find that person? I would love if they could. Now, do I think they will? Probably not. But if they can find someone in between there, would be great even in itself. And even the guy who replaced Signetti at James Madison, Bob Chesney, is another guy that they need to keep an eye on, because I think that could be maybe the next Signetti. You never know, right? So it's like you got to keep taking your shots. You got to keep trying. If it's not working now, there's no point in extending it out any further. Let's move on to the next guy. And it's easy for me to say because I'm not the one who's going to pay the, I think, $31 million buyout that Jonathan Smith would get if they let him go and, he doesn't find a job elsewhere. But it does kind of feel like if they keep stringing it along and they don't take that chance on potentially finding their own Signetti, they're only going to set the program further and further behind.
The buyouts are crazy now because they get such a soft landing afterwards, where it's like, well, I don't have to do anything after this if I don't want to. But it'll be interesting to see who they find. I do think they can pull somebody pretty decent here. The James Madison guy is a good reference there, because I do think people are going to be looking to that program now because of the success of Signetti and the continued success of the program. But yeah, interesting stuff. I see the Michigan State game is going on the basketball side, so I want to switch to that here with Robert Bondy after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with friend of the show, Robert Bondy of Spartans Wire. I didn't realize when we booked this interview that we'd be booking it right in the middle of the first Spartans basketball game here, Robert. So you're probably trying to watch that on the side or have it ready to catch up with after the show. But I'm curious what you think of the Spartans season, kind of as a season preview, like we did for the football side of things, like we just talked about. I really liked this Spartans team last year. There were, I think, a lot of things to like. There was a lot of likable players. I think they were one of, I don't know how many, 10 teams or so that had a legitimate chance to win the whole thing last year. Even once you got into the tournament, things would have had to break their way and you'd have to get some pretty star-making performances. But they retained a decent amount of players. Richardson went to the NBA, as he probably should have, but they got a lot of veterans back. I think they're the only team. Are they the only team in the Big Ten to return their starting five from last year? So I'm curious what you think of this team here as the season kicks off here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because last year they went into the season and they probably actually had lower expectations coming into the year than this year's team did. But they had, as you mentioned, Jace Richardson emerge as a star, and they got obviously better play out of other players throughout the season, and they quickly kind of just became dominant, right? So losing Richardson and losing Akins, you kind of do lose your top two scorers, or your kind of two guys that can make shots for themselves and guys who can, if you need a bucket, you can lean on. At least comparing to last year's squad, right? That's going to be a tough break for them, but they have talent, right? I mean, they do return, I think, 4 of their main 5 pieces between Jackson Kohler, Carson Cooper, Jeremy Fierce Jr., and then of course Colin Carr, the freak athlete. So they have 4 guys that I think could be a great nucleus, and then it just comes down to can any of those 4 become superstars? Can any of those 4 become dominant? And then if not, or at least they can improve enough, do you get someone else that maybe becomes your Jace Richardson of this year's team and emerges down the stretch, or emerges late in the year as kind of a maybe you didn't see it coming guy? I do like some of the pieces they added in the portal. Trey Fort is going to be a guy who right now I think is coming off the bench for him behind Kurt Tang at that 2 or that shooting guard spot. But I like his potential. I like what he could potentially do long term for the Spartans, and he could be maybe that sharp shooter that fills in some of that role from Jane Akins and Jace Richardson that you lost off last year's team. But it's again, it's going to be very similar to last year, too, though. They have probably about 10 guys they can run deep with. It's just a matter of who's going to become that star, or who can become that guy that can maybe elevate them to a new level. Because right now, I'd say when you look across the Big Ten, they're probably in that, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th, range on the high end. But they also, the Big Ten's so deep that you could easily find yourself back in the middle of the back, too, if guys don't emerge.
It is similar to the football side and kind of the depth thing here with the Big Ten, or the Big 18, as it were. But I I should clarify when I say return their starting five. I think they're the only team that the five that they're starting this year were actually on the roster last year with all the turnover in the portal and everything. But I do see that Kerr Tang, because I think he was the most tenuous one on the starting five. I see he's off to a good start here. It looks like his line is looking pretty decent. So I'm curious how he'll do, because he mainly just was kind of in the game in garbage time for the most part. He got into the back end of the rotation at times last year, but he's a guy we didn't see a ton of. Whereas, that front court is going to be pretty strong. I liked what Cooper did last year. He was showing a lot of versatility. Kohler, I think, could be a key for this team if he kind of is able to harness his energy from last year and kind of develop some of the skill set. He's got a lot of skills for that kind of wild style that he plays the game in. And then same with Carr, with his athleticism. If you can get some jumpers out of those big guys, then you're looking pretty good in that front court.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it's one of the things they said over the offseason. Carson Cooper's kind of worked on his jump shot. He's a big guy in the post, but if he can extend the floor, that really makes his game even more dimensional and gives him more to it. Kohler last year, I think, proved that he could play from the outside in as well. And Colin Carr is another player who's just, when he first came in as a freshman, he was known for all his highlight dunks and blocks, but he's really evolved in the last 2 years. And I mean, this is the year where if he's going to, potentially make his way and playing in the NBA and try to, be more than just that freak athlete, he's got to put it all together. So I think ultimately if Michigan State's going to, be above, if they're going to be a second weekend team in the NCAA tournament or further, they're going to need someone like Colin Carr to become a superstar. They're going to need, a Jackson Kohler and a Colin Carr to, at least elevate their games enough. Because I think with Fears running the point, you have that guy, and I think Kerr Tang could be another guy is in that bucket too of if he can step up, right? You have some decent and really high floor guys, with this roster. It's a matter of do they want to become, elite, or if they want to get to that level of last year where they're contending for an actual Final Four and, beyond that. They're going to need some guys to step up. And, it's the unknown because some of these guys were mostly role players last year. But, they had so many good role players mixed with a couple superstars. You really only need maybe one or two of those guys to become superstars or at least elevate their level to, all Big Ten, let's just say, with the other guys still being high-end role players. So it's a good roster. It's going to be, I think, a very good team. I think, never say never because you would – anything can happen, but I would be pretty surprised if this team didn't at least make the NCAA tournament and, win a game in the tournament. But we'll see because, anything can happen. I've said, a couple years ago when they were, I think, number 2 in the preseason, they were having to win against Northwestern late in the year just to make the tournament as a bubble team. I could have never predicted that. I would assume we won't be in that position this year. We'll see, though, when it all comes down in the end because it's a long season. The openers tonight, I think it probably snuck up on a lot of people because I know all the Big Ten teams, I think, are playing their openers tonight on a Monday in November that people are so focused on football. But we'll see. I like what they have. It's just a matter of can they go from, pretty good to great like we saw last year.
Well, this is, I think, why they're giving us an extra day here or extra hour over the weekend here to watch more sports because, it's coming up fast between the season overlap and then baseball just ended. But, that 3-4 combo, I feel like that's where you could really have some production between Carr and Kohler because with more usage, like you said, there was a lot of usage that went away. I was a big Akins fan. Richardson developed throughout the season, but Kohler kind of strikes me as their version of Isaiah Stewart. He doesn't have the defensive prowess necessarily. He's a good defender, but he's not like a post defender blocking a ton of shots in the same way. But he's a versatile defender. He's a high effort guy. He seems to bring a lot of energy when he comes to the floor, and you can kind of see everybody else kind of lift their game up when that happens. But between that and his surprising ability to hit the three, which Stewart has gone back to that this year, between him and Carr, I feel like somebody out of that could be, like you said, one of their star players because somebody's got to take the mantle. They lost a lot of leadership. They lost between Akins and then Richardson, even as a young guy, and then a lot of points and scoring and assists and guard play. I think Fears should probably take that mantle to a degree because his brother obviously has been playing very well. Not that always transfers, but he looked like a guy that could be developing this year too.
No, Fears, I think, is, he's going to be your stereotypical Michigan State point guard. I think he's, the big thing against him last year, and I think that's why maybe some people sleep on his ability is, he wasn't a great shooter. And I think you got to remember he came off that, tragic injury in the, off the court during that freshman season. I think it seems like now he's back to full strength. And if he can get his offensive game going where he's hitting threes and you're making him actually have to honor his shot, he's going to be dangerous because he can see the floor very well with his assists and the way he just runs the point for Michigan State. So I trust him to be pretty darn good. I think you're right that if Kohler can, continue to elevate his game, he's going to be a big factor for them. It's like I said, it's hard to even predict who's going to be that guy that steps up because they have so many guys that could be it. As long as one or two become, those alphas, let's just say, for them, then they're going to be pretty darn good because they have so much depth. And again, you have an off night from one of your stars. If you have somebody that can pick it up, that goes a long way, especially when you're talking about, college athletes like this. They can go, nights on, nights off. So they have the depth. They need someone, though, or at least a few of them, to become elite for them to be, that, like I said, second weekend or beyond team in the NCAA tournament.
It'll be interesting to watch this team this year. We'll be keeping an eye out on them. That's part of the reason we wanted to do the programming switch, so we had more room to cover college basketball during the season, during the football season, because we had to kind of delay it last year. So we'll be keeping up with Robert Bondy and his coverage, and we'll be getting him back on. But be sure to tell the people where they can follow your great coverage here, Robert.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm always writing the Spartans Wire. It's a USA Today affiliate, but if you just search Spartans Wire in your Google tab, you'll find us. We always got great work, me and my peers. And then I also am available on X for my opinions and retweeting and all that good stuff. That's Robert Bondy 5.
Be sure to follow him. He's got great Spartans coverage and sports coverage of all kinds. He used to cover the Lions and different teams as well. And we'll look forward to having you back on the show soon here, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. No, I always appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks to Robert Bondy. Appreciate him coming on. We're going to turn our attention to hockey. We haven't done Red Wings coverage or Pistons coverage since the season's started, so we're going to do that next. We've got Ryan Randall of the Grind Line podcast coming on to talk some Red Wings with us, because I feel like the attitude around the Red Wings hasn't been the most positive, but these have been some fun games. So I'm going to see if Ryan's upbeat about it. He's usually a pretty upbeat guy. So a couple of Ryans will cut it up again about the Red Wings here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're happy to have Ryan Randall join us of the Grind Line podcast. For those of you following the firing / raise pay count here from Big G, he did take away my raise that I got in the first segment by saying a couple Ryans were going to cut it up after the break. So sorry about that to our audience. But we did have a good conversation about sandwiches the first segment. So Ryan Randall, I want to get your best sandwich. If you're going to make a sandwich, what are we putting on it here? Because it's National Sandwich Day.
Ooh, I guess the wife gets the win then, because she made some Philly cheese sliders this evening. Does it count for National Sandwich? Does sliders count?
Okay, we got to go to Big G on this. I'm getting a thumbs up from my producer Big G here. He said, because we had a whole conversation about whether or not a hot dog was a sandwich, an open face sandwich was a sandwich. So we did different things. We didn't talk about sliders, but apparently those do meet, because I think for Big G it was the buns. It was whether the buns disconnected. So in a slider they are disconnected. So that does work. That brings up an interesting thing, though, for the end of the show here, because we're previewing the fact that the open face sandwich may or may not be a sandwich, but Big G, the cheesesteak bun usually connects. I'm just putting that out there.
It was a Hawaiian, the Hawaiian sliders, like the little buns that you can get.
Right. And are those connected?
So it's even better.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good one to have it on. I had a Philly cheesesteak today too. That's the third vote for Philly cheesesteaks. So I feel like that's leading right now. But I know it's surprising, but we didn't bring Ryan on to talk about Philly cheesesteaks. We brought him on to talk about some puck here, and I'm happy with the new format of the show that we can do this, because I felt like last year we had to kind of rush our hockey coverage after the football season, season and sneak it in during the season. And I'm curious what you think of this, Ryan, because it seems like the attitude around the team, and maybe it's some carryover from last year. There's obviously been some disappointment with them missing the playoffs fairly narrowly. Obviously 2 years ago, very narrowly, and then last year, fairly narrowly. There's a bit of an attitude, I feel like, around the Wings, but this has been a great start to the year, not only performance-wise, which you'll help us assess that part of it, but these have been some exciting games. They've had 2 shootouts in the last 3 games. I'm liking the intensity and the play so far, but I'm curious what you think of this early season just in general.
Oh, I mean, I'm thrilled. It's probably, looking at this earlier today, actually, it's one of their best starts in the last 15 seasons. They haven't touched 10 wins in their first 14 games since 2010, 2011. I'm not trying to jinx that as they go into Vegas tomorrow night. But you look at the fact that this group started with 3 rookies on the roster, and they've still got 2 that are making a huge impact. They're playing with fire. They're playing with pace more often than not. They've had a few games just like, what are we actually doing out there? But there's an extra pep to step, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to what Todd McClellan has brought in. I know we talked about him last year after the fact, and there's just a renewed sense of urgency, it seems like, with this team, and the fact that they're sitting tied for the second most points in the league right now, I think speaks a lot to that.
I agree, and I do think that's a big part of this change. It's strange because I feel like the 4 teams in our Detroit market, the 4 professional teams, are all kind of generally following the same path. The Red Wings might have been a little bit behind, but in kind of a strange way, because they were following the young core type of thing that I feel like a lot of the other teams are doing. The Pistons have a young core, the Tigers have a young core, the Lions have a young core, and they're kind of building around that, trying to get a culture guy in there. They didn't really get their culture coach until the end of last season with McClellan. Now it seems like that's working under him, as you referenced, and we hadn't seen some of the young guys because in hockey it does take a little while. I guess unless you're Emmett Finney, then it doesn't take very long, but I have liked how these guys have played on the main roster. I know the Griffins are playing well too. It's kind of giving me a bit of a Tigers vibe, because this is what we followed all season on the Tigers side of things, that not only was the main roster performing pretty well while the average age was a little bit lower, with kind of some value veterans added in, which I want to talk about, but the minor league teams were also playing very well, which seemed to bode well for the future. And now we've got an undefeated Griffins team and a Red Wings team that, like you said, Ryan, is starting out hotter than I think a lot of people expected.
Oh, totally. I think that just coming out of the month of October, over 500 would have been probably a win for most of us that were watching from afar. But to enter November and now you're 9-4 in the season, that's probably their best case scenario coming out of it. And you mentioned that the comparison to the Tigers in particular, I know we talked about that is around the Olympic time frame, and how a lot of that has just taken time, right? These guys to finally make it to the roster and to the big leagues and make an impact. We're starting to see that we have Sandy and Pellica. I know we had talked about him ad nauseum previously. Emmett Finney, the surprise, I think, to literally everyone in the fan base and even the organization. Then Brandon Nygaard, who started with the team, he hit his 9 games. They got sent back down because they can work with his contract and slide it. But that's not to say that we couldn't see him back up at some point this season if he lights it up down there. So it's really interesting that we're not even talking about a guy like Nate Danielson, who seemingly, based on Todd McClellan in the preseason for his injury, it almost seemed like he was going to be a lock to be on this roster. And maybe that would have been in lieu of Brandon Nygaard. But the excitement level, I think, with the youth. And then you've got the core who's firing on all cylinders. I mean, Larkin, he's been, I think, top 5 in scoring right now. You've got Alex DeBrink and Lucas Raymond, both all 3 of those guys averaging over a point per game. Like the right things are clicking for a team that I think as a whole hasn't really hit its stride yet. And they're also doing this, mind you, without Patrick Kane.
That's the big one. I feel like between the young additions and then also the veteran additions that they got, we've almost kind of forgotten about that. It occurred to me when Van Riemsdyk came out there and did the fourth shootout attempt in this last game. It was like, it was just kind of hitting me. I don't know why it took to that for me for that to occur to me. I knew Kane was out, obviously, but it was like, we would have seen Kane by shootout attempt number 4. He would have been one of the first 3 here, and then to see Van Riemsdyk, who was the difference in that shootout, that reminded me of that. But famously from the same draft, getting him and Bernard Docker and some of the other guys in there, Appleton has played well. I feel like all of the new guys, I'm curious of your assessment of each one, but it feels like all the new guys, and then obviously the big acquisition of the goalie of Gibson, I feel like all the new guys have acquitted themselves well, even though they were lower level acquisitions on the veteran free agency side of things.
Yeah, the Appleton call out because he stepped up in a big way, right? When Raymond was down, Kane was down at the same time, you saw Appleton step up and play on that wing alongside Finney, and he didn't miss a beat. He was able to pop in a few goals, got 6 points in 13 games. I don't think that for the expectation you probably had with him, you can ask for much more. He's contributing great on the penalty kill. And then you kind of move your way down, like ASP. We already touched on him, what the impact that he's making defensively. And you go further, you mentioned Bernard Docker. I think that he's had a sound start to the season along with Travis Hamonic. It's kind of a back and forth between those two. I mean, Hamonic reminds me a lot of Justin Hall, who unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, was waived and down to Grand Rapids. But the fact that they're able to rotate these guys out a little bit, especially on the defensive side, it speaks to the depth they're kind of playing with, but also the fact the system is working for what they were able to bring in with Trent Bondy on the side of things. And I think that speaks to the 9-4 record, and to that matter, the penalty kill, which has been kind of the Achilles heel of the team, and now they're top 10 in the penalty kill right now, and it's early in the season. But I think last year they had a below 70% rate through their first 10 games or so, and right now I think they're hovering around 85, 90%. So the fact that they've had that kind of flip on its head on top of the players they've brought in, you mentioned Gibson, had a few outstanding starts already, along with Cam Bell, but they've been equally playing 7 games apiece. But they're stealing games, I think, in a way that we haven't necessarily seen the last several years, and they're feeding off of each other in all the right ways, and I think that's fantastic.
We talked about this a little bit in a previous interview, but I think it was impressive what McClellan was able to do with that short season that he had, coming in and having to try to turn the culture around. But there is something to be said. This happens all the time, but we don't really track it, I don't think, well enough. When you have a full off season with a team, whether it's an injury replacement mid-season or it's a coach, whatever it is, being able, especially with a coach like him, being able to see the nuances of these different players in a camp format and in practice more often, that you can see why that would be a compounding effect. But you bring up another important piece of this, which is Trent Yawney. He's clearly been a big piece, and I got to think it's the hat. I think I wouldn't be able to wear that type of hat, but I feel like he draws power from that hat.
He really does sport that well on the away games, doesn't he? He's out there, he shows no fear with it, and he's just, bam, I am here, and I'm going to make your life hell on the defensive side of things.
He looks like he's a character from Fight Club in that hat. I feel like he's like the old grizzled veteran that is advising a young like Brad Pitt or Edward Norton in the Fight Club game with that hat. Yeah, that he does. The look on the bench when they go to him is always the same, and he always nails it with that hat. But yeah, he's done a great job, and the coaching staff as a whole. They obviously replaced the goalie coach as well. But I want to talk about the goalie combination a little bit more, because that was the big acquisition in the offseason, but it's been kind of, like you've said, a rising tide lifts all boats kind of situation. So I want to talk about how that's changed the math and the situation for the goalie, even for the future here for the Wings. But we'll take a quick break and come back with Ryan Randall of the Grind Line podcast. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a Twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Coming back here with Ryan Randall, talking about sandwiches, hats, and also hockey. Ryan, I did ask my producer, I turned to him in between the segment, and I said, I think you would look good in one of those hats. And he had to look up what we were talking about, and he did confirm that he does indeed have a Trent Yawney hat. So that I think that needs to be a trend. Instead of, you know how the stadiums, they do like a white out or whatever it is, and they all wear one color. I think everybody should wear a hat for one of the games. Can you imagine like 20,000 fans at LCA all having a hat?
Ooh, we need a Yanni night is basically what you're saying.
Exactly. I think that would be. I think the energy there would be electric, or everybody would be silent. I don't know if they would be like Yanni and just all stand like with their arms kind of folded, but then it'd be super intense. Like then the opposing team wouldn't know what to do with that kind of atmosphere. It's like, I've got 20,000 Yannis in the house. I don't know what to do with this.
I mean, just think if they comp that with a flannel night in lieu with the hat. What's the hat called? What's the proper term for that hat?
I'm not sure. Big G, I think, is going to be able to help us. He looked it up.
It's called a driver's cap.
Oh, I wouldn't have known that one.
Driver's cap with flannel. You can do that. You can pay homage to Trent, and you can pay homage to Mickey Redmond with a flannel. Like, it could be one heck of a night.
I think we're on to something here. I think we might have to present this to the Red Wings, especially in their centennial season. They're doing different promotions. I like this. We're on to something. But I like that we always get some brainstorming done, and we talk some good Wings here. But yeah, there's more Wings to talk about. I mean, the goalie situation has been great. I am a big. It feels like Talbot has gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit because he's always been kind of the solid pair with whoever he's been paired with throughout his Red Wings tenure. Now he's got a guy that's really a counterpart with him. And I was going to say next that Talbot is probably on his way out, but I'm not saying that because of his play. I'm saying that because of his advanced age, but he's still looking very good. But it seems that the progression here was supposed to be, okay, we're going to get Gibson in, and then Talbot will play until he's done, and then kind of age out, and then give way to likely Kosa, and then he can be paired. He can be the young goalie learning from Gibson, and we've got kind of a progression going. Then maybe Augustine gets into the mix or what have you. But I'm really impressed with this goalie pair because, yeah, the defense has had some blips. It's been a lot more solid this year, but those two back there, they don't give away a lot of cheap ones, and when it's mattered, they've really been very solid as a pair, and like you said, have worked very well together, where there's not really a big difference between what's happening out there night to night, no matter if the back of the uniform says Talbot or Gibson.
Yeah, and I think that's been important because, like I mentioned just a little bit ago, they split the start 7-7, right? But you look at the loss. I mean, Cam Talbot's rocking with a 5-1, with Gibson going 4-3. But that's really not to say that the losses have been bad outside. I mean, arguably for Gibson, he had a start in that Montreal opener that just wasn't pleasant from really any sense of the word when you watch that game. But since then, he's stolen the game. He's been put in overtime, and you look what these two can do. You mentioned Talbot being 38. He won't be 39 until after the season's over. Is this likely his last year? It could be. I mean, with the way that he looks on the ice, the way he looked last night, going into the shootout, he's playing fresh. The key thing, I think, as we talk about any goalies, is will they both stay healthy? I know that Gibson's got a little bit of back and forth with that. Talbot was all going to have a little bit of issue last season. But I think to that point, and as you mentioned it, you got Sebastian Kosa, you've got Postova, both are just crushing down in Grand Rapids. I think you can go with either guy at this point to bring in as an as-needed basis to back these two up. But what I appreciate about Talbot and Gibson right now is They are splitting time. They're not necessarily, they're riding the hot hand, but at the same time, they're also making sure that both guys are staying fresh enough to give this an opportunity to win. To go back on the Yanni defense piece, they're playing well more often than not. And some of these guys, in a way that we haven't really seen the last several seasons, they're clearing the lanes. They're keeping things a little less hectic. Yes, it does happen. And we've seen it a little bit in breakdowns late in games of late. But I think what's important is they both look comfortable. They're both in the puck well. They're able to make the saves in a timely manner to help this team win, which is, again, I'll say probably over and over again, something we aren't very familiar with over the last several seasons.
There are a few things that are different about this team, and one of the things I was thinking about while you were making all those great points is the fact that I think one of the other parts, we always use the word grit for Detroit sports teams, and they do seem grittier with some of the acquisitions and some of the young guys. They've clearly focused on that, and then that's kind of making the team grittier as a whole. But that also doubles into a bit of resiliency when playing these games, because with these long seasons, the Lions have always been good at it. The Tigers were typically pretty good at it with a 162 game season, but you're going to take some bad losses. There's two that I can think of this season, but they bounced back from those losses very well. They're not letting that stick with them, because although the McClellan time frame went pretty well last year, it was kind of murky. With they would go on a 7-game win streak, but then they would go on a several game losing streak as well. And this team isn't looking like that's as much of an issue, because I think they do have that grit and toughness to say, hey, no, we're going to forget about that one. Okay, yeah, that game went awry. We're not going to worry about that. Between whether it's the goalie pairing, the difference in the defense, you can even see the improved alignment as the season has gone on. Early season, there were some communication issues, but now it seems to be getting better. But whatever these games are, they've had a lot of different style of wins. They've had low scoring wins. They've had games where they've had to come back from a several goal deficit, and they've won one of those. It seems like their ability to win in these different ways is going to be good, because, yeah, like you said, hockey changes from night to night, and you never know quite what you're going to get and how the puck is going to bounce, and if the bounces are going your way. But if they can roll with those punches and win from these different phases, then that's going to bode well as the season goes on here.
Yeah, I think the bounce back point is the biggest one, because one of the main things that McClellan harped on when he came in last season as an outsider is he saw the team as being very fragile, right? So you open up the season with a 5-1 goose egg to Montreal, but then you come out and win 5 straight. You have a 7-2 loss to the New York Islanders, and now you go back and win 3 straight. You lose to Anaheim, really what was a pretty bad game. You bounce right back on the road and win another one. You won 3... on this road trip right now, they've won 3 or 4, hoping to win 4 or 5 as they go into Vegas tomorrow night. But to be able to respond the way they have to this point, I think speaks a lot to McClellan. It speaks a lot to the leadership and how they're trying to change things and shift things in the right direction. But it also speaks to the fact that they're doing it in a lot of different ways. You mentioned the low-scoring games. They have a 2-1 OT victory over Tampa. That was a wild game, but they're also scoring goals. They had a 6-4 comeback win against St. Louis a couple nights later. That one, I think, was I envy my cousin, because he was at that game when it was 4-0. I was like, oh, this is not a fun one to be on a date with, but they end up coming back and scoring 6 straight goals. So there's things from this team that we've seen that are repeats in terms of you come out flat and you don't react and you just kind of, the game's, it is what it is. But then we also see, like, the St. Louis game, I think, is a great example of what this team might be built to do, and they're not going to give up as what we're typically used to seeing. And if that's going to be the case moving forward, if they're able to limit those losses to 1 or 2 at a time in terms of a losing streak, that's a recipe for success over the course of an 82-game season.
I agree, and I think you hit on it earlier in the interview, but one of the most heartening things about this team is that it's not probably the final product either. You've got like you said, you've got young guys that were sent down and could come back up. We didn't see Danielson, which we thought we might. He might be coming. Some of these young Griffins might be coming. You've got Kane that hasn't been a part of the fold for most of the season so far, and so you add those pieces in, and they're looking even better, and you're deepening those lines. But the fact that Finney and some of these other guys have filled holes that much better and much earlier than they thought is incredible to me. So it's been a wild season, but it's been fun because they're entertaining games. Like I said, 2 of the games basically were kind of start to finish not very good from the Red Wings side of things. All the other games have been exciting and played very hard, and I think that should continue over the course of the season. And we're happy to be covering it from week to week here. So you'll see Ryan and a bunch of the folks that cover it for us back here on the show. But be sure to tell people where they can follow you and tell people about the podcast here.
Yeah, you can find us on any of the podcast platforms, the Grindline Podcast. You can find us on YouTube, X, I believe, Greg, I got on Instagram, Facebook, I believe, Blue Sky, pretty much anywhere you can think of, you can find us. We have a nice partnership with Vintage Detroit in Metro Detroit. It's over in the shop. They're our go-to for jerseys. Unfortunately, don't have the Centennial. That's another story. So really, anywhere that you look online, you type in the Grindline Podcast, you will are likely to find us there. So give us a follow if you can. And yeah, enjoy this hockey season while it's going.
Definitely follow these guys. It's great stuff, as you can tell with Ryan. They've got some humor. They've got a lot of knowledge. And Ryan, feel free to run with my driver's cap idea with Vintage Detroit if you want to too. I'll give you permission.
I'll reach out to the Wings on that one. See if we something going, and all credit to you guys for it.
Well, that's where you have to get Vintage Detroit to make the hat, and then that way they can benefit by selling 20,000 hats, and then we'll load LCA with all the drivers' caps.
You might be onto something with that one. We might be able to get Lynn on board if we're going that route.
Well, see, we do some designing with my business with different clothing and stuff, so we're a little familiar with it. So yeah, we'll talk offline about that, but we'll have Ryan back on. It's great information. We appreciate you joining the show, and we look forward to having you back on later in the season here.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me back on. It's great times. So the Wings.
Exactly. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks to Ryan Randall. Appreciate him coming on. Good Red Wings summary here. We'll be covering them from week to week, like I said, Red Wings and Griffins, because we've got some great folks on the west side of the state covering the Griffins, and they're off to a great start, as we referenced. But next, we're going to kick off the NBA coverage here for the season with Bryce Simon. He's been covering the Pistons very well. He's been doing his summaries after the games, and I was just reading his recent one from the exciting Mavericks game in Mexico City. So we'll talk to Bryce Simon after the break. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to kick off the Pistons coverage here. Like I said, for the Red Wings segment, this is a nice benefit of moving the football coverage over to the Thursday show. We get to talk to people like Bryce Simon every week and talk Pistons and Red Wings here. And Bryce has gotten off to a good start to the season, just like the Pistons have with his coverage. And so I'm excited to check in with him. But Bryce, it's National Sandwich Day, so I'm wondering what Bryce Simon's favorite sandwich is.
Anything without chips, which anybody who listens to the Pistons Pulse podcast will kind of understand that reference. Me and my guy, Omari Sankofa II, have some debates about chips on sandwiches or not. But, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just go, I don't know if it's old school or childish or whatever, but just give me a good peanut butter and jelly, I think.
Nice.
Strawberry jelly, not grape.
I'm with you all the way on that. I like to grill my peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah,
do you like that? Perfect.
So I had never done that until I got to college, and then at my college, I got to know the cooks or whatever really well. And one day they're like, "Hey," they saw me making one, and they're like, "Hey, bring that over here." And they put it on the little flat top or whatever, and it's a game changer. I haven't done it in a while. Hopefully, my wife is listening in the other room and hears this conversation, and maybe throws one on the flat top or the whatever here in the next week or so.
It makes a huge difference. I don't have any shame in saying that at 42 that I eat a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich for dinner sometimes here, because that is a game changer, the grilled part. I'm with you on the chips. I don't particularly like those on a sandwich, but I do like it when it's a little bit on the crispier side, but you can achieve that from grilling any sandwich, making it into a panini, whatever it is. I haven't caught the chip debate, though. I'm going to have to listen to one of the episodes where you and Omar, because when I have him on the show, I'll have to ask him about this.
Oh no! You listen. If you do that, you better bring him on for about 45 minutes, because Omari thinks he's a whatever Michelin star chef or whatever it's called. He'll get into the consistency of this and the salt, salty versus the sweet or savory, all sorts of stuff. He gets down the rabbit hole, so you better be prepared.
Okay, well, I'm going to make sure next time he's on the show, I'm going to make sure to have kind of the theme that fits that, a food theme, so that he can sound off on that a little bit, because I'm curious to hear him. We haven't gotten him off track. I know on your guys' podcast that's a little bit more likely, but when he does the interviews for us, it's mainly just basketball. It's hard to get him off track, so I'd like to get him off track a little bit on the show.
Yeah, bring up some food, and you'll get something a little bit different, I think. So
I like it. Well, I appreciate the tip there, but and I like your choice with the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But we got to talk some hoops with Bryce Simon, because he's one of my favorite guys that covers the Pistons market here, because he's got a very good eye for it. He does multiple podcasts, including the one he just mentioned, and he does one with Sam Vincini as well. And it's an interesting start to the season. I thought about this with the Red Wings segment as well, because I was telling the Red Wings analyst that it seemed like we kind of had a sour start to the season with the Red Wings season. And part of that was how the season went last year. That wasn't in existence for the Pistons, but man, that Cleveland game really cratered everybody. And I'm sure you were thinking the same thing, because you have a good forward outlook on it. It's like, guys, there's 82 games here, and then lo and behold, after that they've looked a little bit better here.
No, it's, actually, again, not to continue to bring up Omari, but he kind of got challenged a little bit on Twitter about that. And Omari's like, over an 82-game season, you have these games. Now, it seems worse whenever it's early in the year and, you're not 5 or 6 games over 500 already, and you're kind of just building out that resume and that record. It obviously wasn't good, right? And you don't want to see those even early in the year. But I think, we're getting to enough of a sample size where you can kind of look at the sample size as a whole a little bit. And I think, what I talked about over there on the pod on Sunday morning was, I feel like you see a pretty decent floor overall for this team. Obviously, there can always be one-game samples where it doesn't look very good, but this team has just shown they're going to be competitive. They're going to really defend, even if I do think there's some flaws defensively. The defensive rating still speaks for itself. And then offensively, they still just got to figure things out. Like we know what Cade is. He's a little inefficient right now. I think that'll come around. But are they going to have the floor spacing? Are they going to have the three-point shooting? I think they're 18th in offensive rating as they started tonight. Obviously, they're playing as we speak. But there's some numbers that are not good, but in a way that makes me encouraged, Ryan, if that makes sense. That I think as the season progresses, you get Jaden Ivey back and those type of things, that we'll see some of those things get better throughout the year.
I'm with you 100%, because I think that's what I try to focus on. Is I think people get too hyper focused on, that Cleveland game didn't go well. Well, why maybe didn't it go well? One, it's early in the season, and some of the things you talked about, but I think the fact that they started the season without Ivy and LeVert ostensibly, and that's two guys that were supposed to make up for the lack of ball handling behind Cade this year. And so they started the season much like they had to battle with last season, but that was with Dennis Schroeder and some other people in the mix. Now, I like Dennis Jenkins a lot. This is not an assessment of his game, but they didn't necessarily think he was going to factor in to be handling the ball, because they weren't expecting to miss LeVert, Ivy, and Sasser at the same time at the beginning of the season.
So that's what I was going to say, Ryan, is like, I go back and forth on Marcus Sasser and like his role, his impact, etc. But I think most people would agree he could be making a major impact right now, especially in the non-Levert games where he's played 3 of 6 coming into tonight. But no Jay Nivey, no Levert. Marcus Sasser all of a sudden is a really intriguing player, and to me, I don't know that you want him in your 2 deep 10-man rotation, but he's kind of like a Paul Reed. I think Paul Reed's a great third center. I think Sasser in the games that Levert didn't play could have really helped this team at least score the basketball. And so those injuries, because a lot of them have been to the same position group in some capacity, have really built up. And even through that, this team is 4-2 coming into this Grizzlies game.
I think that's a great point, and I get going the 2 deep, but I'm sure you do this too. Oftentimes when I'm looking at a roster, I go to the 3 deep with the two-way
100%.
players, and with the G League now, it's easy to do that. And the 3 deep really does look pretty good. The only problem with the 3 deep is if you take those 6 guards, we're missing 3 of them that would be in the 3 deep, and they would be 2 through 5 or so. They would be like 2, 3, and 5, and that's who you're missing right now, which, like you said, is a dearth, is a big hit to that position here at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and then you're like, well, Chaz Lanier, at some point, I think Chaz Lanier makes an impact on this team, but he's a rookie, and rookies, especially guards, it's not, and if he's not knocking down shots, which I know that's what he has to do, but sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, and he doesn't really provide a ton of impact in other ways. I'm actually a huge Danis Jenkins guy. I think his minutes have been a little bit of a mixed bag. But we've seen it at other position groups. I mentioned Paul Reed, but the other guy that's had to do that is Javonte Green. We've seen Javonte Green give this team real minutes, and you don't look at the box score and just go, oh, my gosh, like Javonte Green has been incredible. But him being able to come in, and again, he's not a guy that I want in the 2 deep, but if somebody's missing a game, like I think Tobias isn't playing tonight, so my guess is we see a little bit of Paul Reed, we see a little bit of Javonte Green. Those are guys you need. You need 12, 13, 14 guys to get you through a regular season, even if you're going to shrink that rotation come playoff time.
I totally agree, and I think the Sasser point is a good one. You've made a lot of good points as usual, but the Sasser thing, he plays a certain role on this team that even if he's not getting consistent minutes, one as a backup, he would be pretty decent. But the idea of and I want to try to bounce around the team as much as we can. One, you mentioned Javonte Green. I want to talk about him, but there's certain guys that clearly bring a lot of energy to this team. Holland and Stewart are the obvious ones when they come off the bench. There's other guys, but Sasser is one of those guys that if the team was a little flat last year, if they threw him in, there were some days where maybe he didn't have it quite as much, but if he got the proper amount of time, typically he could get in a groove, and there were some games he gave 20, 25 points with the proper amount of time, and he could be kind of an instant offense kind of guy when the team is flat. And I think from the guards, that's going to be extra important because you have that from Holland, you have that from Stewart, and some other ones that are more front court players or wing players, but you need a guard that can provide that too.
Yeah, you just need that scoring from that position. I'm staring at the box score for the season right now, the box score stats, and again, Cade hasn't scored the ball efficiently at all. I think that it's pretty easy to tell that has to improve, and I assume most of us think it will based off what we've seen Cade throughout his career. I think the other aspects of his game have been good in terms of his creation and his defense. Jalen Duren's the second leading scorer on this team right now, and that's great for Jalen Duren, but there is a part where it's like, man, you need some more scoring, right? Asar Thompson's the third leading scorer, and again, I love Asar Thompson. I love his defense. He's doing a little bit more on-ball creation stuff, but I'm not saying Sasser would be the second leading scorer, but when those guys are your second leading scorer, your third leading scorer, and those type of things, being able to have a guy like Sasser who might be able to chip in 12 points on this game, 10 points in this game, and like you said, maybe one of those 6 games he drops 25 because he gets on a heater, late third quarter against the other team's second unit, and they just don't have it. And again, I think this is where I'm confident about this team is we're talking about all these things that are missing right now, and some of the flaws they're dealing with, and yet they're still 4-2 with a positive net rating and all of those positive indicators.
I think that's the best point of the interview so far. I mean, they're not a complete product. They have a young team. They have new players. They have some key players out, and they're still performing pretty well. I want to talk about some of those wing players that you were mentioning after the break, because those are going to be maybe some of the pieces that could be some of the biggest value add scenarios here for the team, with Tobias Harris maybe missing some games or needing a rest, and with some of these guards being out. So stick with us. We'll come back with Bryce Simon. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Bryce Simon of the Pistons Pulse podcast and several other things here that he does. He's just adding to his repertoire, and he's got a lot of great stuff going. Having a good conversation here about the early season for the Pistons and the young Pistons. You hit on a few guys here, Bryce, that I think the wingman part of the team really interests me. It all does, obviously, but the between the combination of you've got a young guy that's poised to break out in Thompson, where I think really you do a great job for those that don't follow Bryce. You got to be sure to follow him, because he breaks down. He does video breakdowns of the individual players. He does a lot of free-form notes during the games, and you get an idea of the trends of some of these guys. But one of the trends that I see when I watch Thompson play, which isn't normally an issue for me, but it seems to be an issue more for Thompson and his style of play, I like guys that tend to hang back and watch the game develop. Cade does a good job of that. He's not overly aggressive when he doesn't have to be. He changes speeds, which is important, especially in the modern day NBA. But with Thompson, I feel like if he can develop that next gear and just be a little bit more aggressive, because he's got the footwork, he's got the athleticism, he can get seemingly to any spot on the floor, but it's like he gets to a spot on the floor and then he doesn't really quite know what to do. Whereas if you somehow, that I remember, I think we had this discussion, I know I've had this with different Pistons folks on the show, when Stewart was trying to figure out his game, it was like if you could have implanted Stewart's motor into Duren, you're creating one of the top centers in the league. It's the same thing now with Holland and Thompson. If you could put Holland's motor into Thompson, then you're creating something that couldn't be stopped. Now, there's a reason that doesn't always happen, because it's hard to develop all those things at the same time, but it's not an effort issue with Thompson. It seems to be an aggressiveness issue, but I'm curious what you see from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think he's still just trying to figure out, like, when do I score? When do I pass? You know, they've put him into a bigger role in terms of he's playing with the ball in his hands, you know, a little bit more. And I think it's been okay so far. I think the biggest number that indicates that is he's just barely over a turnover per game. So he's playing almost 28 minutes a night in the non-Cade minutes. Heck, even in some of the Cade minutes, he's being asked to initiate the offense and create offense. And he's doing this as a guy who has no three-point shot to speak of, right? Like, nobody's respecting that from Asar Thompson right now. And so you're just trying to figure out how to attack, where to attack. I miss a couple short mid-range jumpers. Do I take the next one, or do I feel like I need to pass it now? So, you know, I'm keeping my teammates involved. What if I miss a third one in a row? You know, like, I think he's just working through those things, and I think that's okay. We got to remember he missed all of last offseason with the blood clot. He had a late start to the season. When he came in, this wasn't necessarily his role. There were guys like Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. and eventually Dennis Schroeder that were taking a lot of on-ball reps and a lot of field goal attempts. So I'm pretty happy with where he's at, but I think you're right. I just think that it's going to take a little bit of time for him to develop that of, okay, when do I shoot? When do I pass? Do I continue to be aggressive here? Is this a possession to get somebody else involved? But overall, I said it the other day, I don't think I would say this has just been like a grand slam start to the season for Asar, but I think it's been very good. I've been very pleased with what I've seen from him.
to continue with the baseball analogy, yeah, it's like a solid double right now. I feel like
sure.
he's played very well, and I mean his defense is unbelievable, and that's obviously not a criticism about his aggression. I understand why he plays that way, and I think, like you said, that will develop over time. You don't want somebody that's overly aggressive either, because Holland is a good example of that, where he has a motor that runs pretty hot, and that's great for the energy boost that he provides. But if he's actually going to get 25 to 30 minutes a game, that might be a tough pace to sustain, because he's one of those guys that once he gets the ball in the open court, you're talking about, well, Thompson's trying to decide whether or not to kick it to somebody, pass it, go with it yourself. That should be the decision tree in your mind as you're going down the floor. Holland doesn't. He's got one option when he's on the break. He's got one thing on his mind.
Yeah, Holland is going to be aggressive. I mean, it was one thing I put in my notes quite frequent. You mentioned the free form notes that I do on the Substack, which, just to plug real fast, is completely free. MotorCityHoops.substack.com. I do freeform's a great word for it. It's not like paragraph reading. I just type in stuff as it happens, and I think it's fairly easily digestible. And then also when I get time, I'll do video breakdowns. But often in those notes last year for Holland as a rookie, I would put, at the very least, he's confident. Like he never lacks confidence. He's not a guy that's going to hesitate to take the third shot attempt if he's missed the two previous. I will say I think we've seen some growth with his passing. It started at Summer League where it really shined and stood out, and I think we've seen it a little bit here in the regular season as well. So I feel like the jumper is going to get there eventually, Ryan. Like, I think it looks fluid and smooth. He's still at 30% right now, but he's up the volume to almost 4 per game. And I want to go back to Asar real quick. I always try to make the conversation, or preface the conversation with, let's never forget his defensive impact, because a lot of the conversation this year is going to be about Asar's offense. And is it growing? Is it not? Is he turning it over? Is he scoring the basketball well? All of that. Let's just make sure we don't forget how impactful his defense is. And I try to always do that, because he's going to be in the all defense conversation, would be my guess, especially if Detroit ends up in the top 10 in defensive rating, which I think they might.
You've spoken about it before on the show, but his versatility, in addition to just his pure defensive ability, is so key for that team, because you do have you have the right size of players, size and skill set, because once Ivy comes back, that's a little bit of a smaller guard for the modern day NBA, but you've got Cade, who's bigger and can kind of guard multiple positions. He'll be on the 2 or 3 that Thompson's not on. You've got Harris, who, one of the things for me that, I mean, I've followed his career since the beginning. He's done surprisingly well against some of these big guys. I didn't think of him as the type of guy to do that, because he's not hefty. He's not particularly tall, NBA tall for a 4. He's not particularly imposing, but man, he doesn't let those centers get anywhere, and that switchability can be helpful when he has to maybe play the 5 for a little bit, or switch based on who's out there. But you mentioned the defense. Thompson's obviously a very high level defender. Stewart, who we're going to get to the big guys by the end of the interview, is a high level defender. I know you mentioned earlier in the interview that you think they have some defensive holes. Where are you seeing that? Is it a certain phase of the game, or is it certain players that you want to see more from?
No, I think there's just there are times where it's like the perimeter defense isn't as good as what you would want. Like, as good as Asar is, I think Ron is a very energetic defender, but that doesn't always mean that it is super impactful or foundational or fundamental, even though he will, make things happen. I think Cade is I would call Cade a positive defender, considering he's a primary initiator of offense. When you compare his defense to other initiators of offense around the league, I would consider his to be good, because a lot of those guys you're trying to make up for, and you're definitely not doing that with Cade. I think another thing is, as good as Isaiah Stewart is, and Isaiah Stewart is awesome defensively, and Jalen Duren has made real strides, is they do still seem to struggle with a pick and pop stretch big. I've mentioned it a couple times now. They're playing the Grizzlies tonight. I'm interested to see how they handle Jaren Jackson Jr. But it's it's no like overwhelming things. And then, well, one final thing, Duncan Robinson is just, he's worse than either Malik Beasley or Tim Hardaway Jr. were defensively last year. Hardaway Jr. at least kind of found a way to be in the right position, take charges. Malik would get after it on the ball at times. But those guys weren't neutral defenders. Duncan Robinson really gets hunted and really gives up a lot at the point of attack. So in regards to that, they're probably having to make up for that quite a bit.
That was the one that I had in mind when you were talking about the defensive inefficiency. Robinson, I feel like that has kind of paralleled or been a key part of his career as a whole. Obviously, we know about the shooting, we know about the gravity, we know about all of that stuff, but the defensive end, when you've got in the modern day NBA, you can get played off the floor. We both know that, and Robinson has always been on that kind of. I've joked before that he might be the Mendoza line of being played off the floor. It's like It's like I'm not sure, he's very close, and then 1 or 2 years on the Heat, it did seem like he was getting played off the floor often, and they had other options. Strus was emerging, but I think he's right on that line, but I do think that, and I want your take on this, I feel like ability-wise, he has as much ability to play defense as like a Beasley, but he's not really applying it as well, or maybe he's getting a feel for his new team and where he needs to be in the rotation. But when you do have Thompson and Stewart and some of those other guys supplementing his defense, you would hope that he would just do some of the point of attack stuff and getting in front of people, to your point on Hardaway, that he needs to do as a primarily offensive player.
Yeah, no, that's I was a little, when I dove into the film when they signed it, or guess signed and traded, or however it played out, I was a little bit more like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad as what I thought. Like, there was more off-the-ball defensive rotation stuff, be in the right position. I don't know that I've seen as much of that. And then just the point of attack has been worse than I thought it was going to be. You get him in transition, and it's a layup or a foul. You get him in the half court, and you're probably going to open his hips and get downhill. And I don't know if it's just like he's such the weakness for this team right now that teams, maybe it looks worse because teams know that's like by far the best place to attack, because Cade will hold up, Tobias will hold up, Duren has gotten better, Ron, Asar, these guys, Javonte Green off the bench will hold up. And so maybe that's the only guy that teams really focus on to attack. So maybe I'm being a little bit too hard on him. I want to be clear as well. His value is still very present and very apparent, being a 40+% three-point shooter entering tonight on 6 attempts. They have to have that on this team. He is so important to them in terms of floor spacing and three-point shooting.
Definitely. And I get what you're saying. There's some strong defenders on that team, so inherently you're going to go after the weaker player, which a lot of times is that big-time scorer like Cade, but I agree with you. He's a plus defender. He's not a Thompson-style defender, but he puts in a good amount of effort and has a good kind of size, athletic profile combination to do that. Want to talk about two of the guys that we haven't talked about much. You mentioned Javonte Green. I've been pleasantly surprised. He's filling, we haven't done our archetype talk yet, but he's filling the role of depth defensive guy that wears a t-shirt underneath his jersey. That I feel like is one of the archetypes that we need to work on. But he has provided some good 3-and-D stuff for them. And then you mentioned that him being the second leading scorer. I want to get your take on Duren's development from last year and what you're seeing as the differences so far.
Yeah, Javonte just filled the role really well. I like that signing whenever it happened. Again, we've referenced it multiple times. I don't think you want him in your too deep. But if he's I feel like Trajan has done a really good job of, hey, who's the third guy? Or if you're talking about wings, guards, who's the fifth guy? And when you look at this team, the third center is Paul Reed, which I think you feel good about. The fifth wing, forward, whatever you want to call it, is Javonte Green, which I personally feel good about coming into the season. And the fifth guard is Marcus Sasser. Now, obviously, that depth has been tested here early in the year, but Javonte's been one that's really been called on. He's played every game, 16 minutes a night, shooting 43% on low volume, we've seen his energy and his defense be impactful in games. I just think he's done his job very well. And some of these guys aren't guys you want to play in the playoffs, right? I'm not sure how many games you win in the playoffs with Paul Reed playing major minutes at center, or Sasser at guard, or Javonte on the wing. But these are the type of guys that help you win regular season games, that get you to the right seed, that put you in better position for your top 8 or 9 guys to win playoff games. I find value in what people would call 82-game players, guys that can be successful in the regular season but not in the playoffs. And I think that's what we're seeing from Javonte. For Jalen Duren, his play finishing was so good the other night, and I did highlight this on the Substack with the video breakdown. We often remember the highlight reel lob finishes, the one Stu throws to him and he finishes with his right hand only. And that stuff is impressive. But what I really liked was the versatility of his play finishing, transition, off-the-ball cuts, the timing of his cuts. He's really figured out that role, and not just in ball screen situations. And that's what impressed me the most from Duren in his career night, scoring the basketball.
It's been fun to watch him emerge here. We'll have to be tracking him, especially in a contract year here, ostensibly, and it'll be interesting to see how the team does. But a great breakdown as usual. We'll be excited to have you back on as the season progresses, but make sure to highlight all of the stuff. You talked about the Substack and the podcast, but you're on multiple podcasts, and make sure to tell people where they can find all your great coverage here.
Yeah, at Motor City Hoops on Twitter, and Blue Sky is the best place, because I'll post anytime we record a pod or anything like that. But if you do want to, go subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack. It is completely free. It will always be free. And the probably the worst thing about it is I might hit your email a little more often than you want. But definitely after every game, with the notes and then video breakdowns whenever I get a chance. And I do have other contributors over there that will pop in from time to time with articles. The Pistons Pulse podcast, once a week with me and Omari, and then Game Theory podcast for NBA and NBA draft in general content.
You're going to want that in your inbox. I get it in mine, and I like it as an accompanying piece to the game. I watch all the games, but it's nice to kind of read that and get Bryce's take there. And one of the contributors I think will be on at some point this season, Harry, I've been in touch with him, and I think he'll be on the show at some point as well, and Bryce will be back. But we appreciate you joining the show and giving us your great knowledge and energy as usual here.
All right. Thank you. Yep. Appreciate you guys. Have a great evening.
Thanks. You too, Bryce. Thanks to Bryce Simon. Appreciate him joining the show. And all the guests here. They were great. Ryan Randall, Bryce Simon, Robert Bondy. But we're gonna get the result that we want here. Big G is ready. He looks like he's ready to talk sandwiches after the break. He's been talking hats. He's been talking sandwiches. And I have some more write-in questions for him regarding sandwiches. Plus, I have an observation from one of the earlier sandwich references here. So come back with us. We'll talk a little bit more sports probably too, because I don't know if you watched the World Series, but that was kind of a big World Series here too. So we'll talk a little bit more sports and close up the show with Big G. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Come back here with Big G. Been wanting to get him back on the show since his great early show appearance. So, but before we get to the sandwich tease, Big G, I'm curious what you thought of the World Series, because I mean, we don't talk about a ton of national sports, but that was one of the better World Series, one of the better playoff series that we've seen, I think.
That was a fantastic World Series. It was. I would have liked to seen Toronto win, just because the Dodgers are kind of turning into the new Yankees with spending, pretty much the national debt to get whoever they want. But good for them. Good for them for repeating, because you still have to make the plays, you still have to hit the ball, you still have to pitch the ball. And they were able to do that one more time than Toronto did. So good for them.
Our buddy Steve Project from the Sports Project on our sister show there talks about the business of sports a lot, and he was mentioning things about the Dodgers. But yeah, it is part of the business. It's there's an uneven salary. There's no salary cap in baseball, so you can spend differently, but you still do get a lot of fun. I mean, it's interesting that the dynasties aren't. It's kind of amazing that they've won back to back. Even the Dodgers with Ohtani and all all of these guys that they got on their payroll and their huge payroll and spending billions of dollars over the last couple of years. It's amazing that it doesn't become more of like winning 5 out of 10 or something like that. There's always these teams that get hot, find competitive advantages. You have the Tampa Rays that did pretty well, and you've got these other teams that find some things, some competitive advantages, and Toronto did that, it seems, this year, and they got hot, and like you said, they got very close, but it led to a very good series overall.
Yeah, it was a great series. 26 million people watched it, which was more than the NBA Finals for the second year in a row. So I think baseball, if people thought that it wasn't back, I think it's back. So
I think it is too. I think they're finding a good combination between satisfying maybe the older crowd that has always supported baseball and getting some young people into the game. That's going to be the key moving forward. Getting the games faster, I think, was key, and they're going to make some changes probably to the balls and strikes here next year, getting some pitch assist stuff I know they used it in spring training, but I could see them using that next year because that was one part that kind of came into question here. But having some assistance for the umpires seems like a natural progression of things because it's hard to call from that angle, and they're trying their best, but it is going to be a decent amount of human error in there.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I don't mean to switch gears on you, but this is something that you might want to talk to Shane about Thursday. Cam Little, 68-yard field goal.
I know. We've got a lot of kicking to talk about with Shane because, he had a 70-yarder in preseason, 68-yarder. I've got a whole list of kicking-related questions. I want to be careful because Shane's going to be very good at covering the NFL as a whole, and he's very specific about, hey, I was an NFL player on all these teams and 15-year player, and he knows the game very well. But I'm fascinated by the kicking stuff, so we're going to be talking about some of that kicking stuff with him. But we've got a few minutes left in the show, and I've got some sandwich questions for you. One is from me. So we were talking about if the bun connects, then it's not a sandwich. What about a Philly cheesesteak like you get in Philadelphia and you go to Joe's or Pat's or whatever the places are, Geno's, and then the bun is still connected? Is that then not a sandwich?
I make it a sandwich. I disconnect
you
the bun.
break it. Big G breaks it. Okay, that's a good one. Now I've got some write-in questions, and I want to go speed round. Yes or no? Is this a sandwich?
Okay,
and then we can get some color commentary afterwards. Cheeseburger.
Yes.
Gyro.
No.
Crepe.
What is wrong with you?
I haven't gotten fired yet. So wait, that wasn't a yes or no answer. I guess that's a no.
That's not a sandwich.
Banh mi.
I'm sorry?
Banh mi. Do you even know what that is?
I am not familiar with that.
It's basically like it's an Asian. It's kind of like a dumpling. It's self-contained. So by your rules, that's going to be no. I'll answer that one for you. It's similar to this next one. Calzone.
No.
Pita pocket.
No.
Twinkie. He's going to get mad at me on this one. This is a write-in question.
What is wrong with you?
Okay, that's another no. Ham sandwich on gluten-free bread.
Technically, yes, but anybody who uses gluten-free bread, unless they are like medically necessary, needs to be analyzed.
Apologies to friend of the show Elaine Shercliffe, who was in to co-host because I believe she's a gluten-free, but I think hers is medical related. We'll have to talk to her. I don't know.
Okay.
We talked about some gluten
forgiven.
stuff with her. Lunchables.
You're fired.
Okay, we're almost at the end of the show. It's so close. And ice cream sandwich. That's the final one.
Absolutely.
Okay, there we go. That was. It took Lunchables to get me fired here. So I like that you make your own sandwich. You know, that with the Philly cheesesteak, you just break it apart and you say, this is a sandwich now. Big G has deemed this a sandwich.
Right, absolutely. And I have my rules, by golly, and I stick to them.
And give Big G all of the gluten. He wants all of your gluten. And put extra gluten in his bread.
Look at me.
I am looking at you. More gluten? Can we inject the bread with gluten? Is that a process?
Look at me. My stomach has its own area code. Come on.
Big G's always got to insult himself. We don't want to do that. We like that he had good hot takes on the sandwiches. We thank him for keeping us on track here. Thank you for joining us in this new iteration. I like that we got more Big G hot takes on the show. I feel like that was good. It gave people a break from me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Thursday show. I will be with you not this Thursday, but the Thursday after. So that will guarantee you absolutely 0 listeners on that day. So, but no, it's going to be good. Shane Graham, ultra talented guy, really knows his stuff. It's going to be a great show.
We're excited to have him in the mix here. We're going to be kicking that off. He's going to be on the phone for half the show on Thursday here, and then we'll have some other good football coverage. But you'll hear Big G again here. But we thank him for keeping us on track.
Aww.
And we thank Mom for joining us in studio here. Her favorite sandwich is a grilled chicken sandwich. We might have that at Brands here because that's the lounge for us here at Jethro. Want to thank all of our sponsors as well. Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, and Jim Hagland of JH Realty. Thanks for their support. Want to thank our guests, Bryce Simon, Ryan Randall, and Robert Bondy. And like Big G said, tune in to the Sports Project from 7 to 9 on Wednesday, and then the Sports Project from 10 to 12 on Saturday. But also tune in to Shane Graham's Extra Points with Ryan Walsh on Thursday, 7 to 9. It'll be our debut show. But until then, and until next Monday, stay informed and stay vigilant. Have a good week.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.